Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. We're excited to have you on this webinar introducing UltraEdit. We often get questions about UltraEdit and its complexity and, hey, where can I start? How can I start with UltraEdit? Do we have some sort of guided tutorial? We have a lot of resources for that, but we've never really kind of brought them all together in one place. And so that's what this webinar is an attempt to do, is to provide a high-level overview of the product. And then we're going to leave you guys with some resources at the end where you can dive more deeply into some functionality that interests you more in UltraEdit. My name is Ben Schwenk. I am Chief of Staff of DevTools here at Idera, and I'm proud to introduce Brad Hawkins, who will be our presenter for this webinar. Brad has just moved from the engineering side of things over to the product management side of things. And so he has adjusted quite well into his new role. He knows the product intimately. He's worked on the product for over 15 years. So he knows it down to the source code level itself. So any bugs that you find, you can blame on Brad. No, I'm just kidding. UltraEdit doesn't have any bugs. But with that, I'll go ahead and hand this over to Brad, and he'll get started with our masterclass. Brad?
All right, hello everyone. We're just going to jump right in here. Kind of got a feel for Ben and myself right here, but as he said, I'm the current project manager for UltraEdit. Before that, I was the lead engineer for, as he said, almost 15 years working on UltraEdit and our associated products. I've probably touched just about every part of UltraEdit to one degree or another over the years, at least on the internal side of that, with the on the development side. So hopefully, as we move through this, if at the end of the presentation, if you have questions, there's a good chance I can answer. And I know Ben has a enormous amount of knowledge in UltraEdit. He's been instrumental in every release for many years, so his knowledge probably surpasses mine. Now that you've met us, let's go ahead and move on to UltraEdit. If you've been using UltraEdit, then you know that the little subtitle there, the Swiss Army knife of editors, really is true. UltraEdit has so many features that new users are often swamped by the number of features that are available to them. So that's part of what this presentation is to do, is to familiarize you with what UltraEdit has to offer and kind of provide some direction, point you where you can go to kind of start learning all the features that are available. UltraEdit has been growing with its users and the industry for 28 years. And it has what I would say humble roots. I mean, we're going to jump ahead a little bit back in time here, and you can see that here's just a little trivia here of UltraEdit from 1996, from its original founder Ian Mead. And at this time, UltraEdit was already on version 4 and running on Windows 95. It actually dates back to Windows 3.1. For those who have been in the Windows world for a very long time, you may remember Windows 3.1. So UltraEdit has really been with the Windows community and the Windows users for a long time, and it's been a valuable tool that entire time. And Ben, of course, if you have any comments you want to make on UltraEdit and its history, feel free to jump in. Now that we've covered that, I think we're going to jump into the main body of the presentation. We're going to look at when you first jump into UltraEdit, you're going to be presented with the welcome page. And we got a little presentation on the welcome page and what that means to you as a new user, and it really will set up your experience with UltraEdit. So without further ado, we're going to start the video on our welcome page. When you first launch UltraEdit, you're presented with our welcome page. The welcome page lets you configure basic visual elements like theme, layout, ribbons, menus, and toolbars, and a few settings. If you ever want to get back to this window later on after you've been using UltraEdit, you can always go to Support, Show Welcome Page. The first thing we're going to tackle here is themes. Under themes, we have a small set of our default themes right here, and I'm going to step through those and show them. You can see the color and style shift as I'm moving through these. We do have additional themes. Under layout, themes, you can see the full list of default themes. You can see there are some differences here. I'm going to switch back to OneDark because that's my preferred theme. If none of these default themes are really your style, you can go to Manage Themes. And in Manage Themes, you can customize almost. We're going to switch over to Balanced. Balanced is similarly, except it adds our File Explorer dockable window, which gives you access to the local file system, network access, and FTP accounts, projects, open files, file lists. We also have our clean layout, which really comes down to just the minimalist layout, the least you can get by with UltraEdit, which is you're going to have your ribbon compressed down, but still accessible, and then a very large editing area. Finally, we have our multi-window layout. This populates a number of dockable windows, the file explorer that we saw previously, the output window for output from any operations, and then some utility windows, function list, XML manager, template list. There are additional windows that you can add. You can just go to layout, and here's a list of all the available dockable windows, and you can add those however you wish. In addition to these default layouts, you can add your own dockable windows, as I said, and if you like the layout you've created, you can go to manage layouts, and in manage layouts, you can save your own layout so that you can always get back to that state. I'm going to switch back to the lean layout, just because that's my personal preference and it's the one I like. Next, we're going to look at ribbons, menus, and toolbars. The ribbon is our default setting in UltraEdit. It gives you the majority of our functionality, visually accessible and presented, a range of categories. I'm stepping through those now. But for those who like a more traditional layout, a more traditional mechanism, you can always use our menus and toolbars. The menus and toolbars really kind of slims down the upper area, but you do have a full set of menus. And of course, access to the toolbar here. And for those who would really like to go with the absolute minimum for the application, you can, of course, go with the menu only. I'm going to set this back to the ribbon. The ribbon is my personal preference. Finally, we do have some settings that are exposed here. These are really just some commonly modified settings. Users can vary on how they want backups enabled. Maybe you don't want any backups created at all when you're editing files, or perhaps you want the backups, the default location is wherever your original file is. Maybe you don't want to clutter up your directory, so you'd like to specify a directory where backups are saved. You can do that right here. We also have tab settings here. Let's set the indent size and whether to insert a tab or insert spaces. It's interesting to me that in working with users over the years, how many users really seem to favor tabs over spaces, and there can be quite some disagreements on that. But regardless, UltraEdit allows you to have it either way you wish. In addition to this very small sample of settings, we do have a configuration dialog that exposes all of the settings available in the application here. This is not something you want to tackle right away, but once you're familiar with the application, had a chance to look at what UltraEdit has to offer, you should come in here and take a look at things you can enable, disable, changes you can make. And once you've completed these 4 steps in the welcome page, you are ready to jump into UltraEdit and start editing. All right, I want to thank everyone for bearing with us there. We start out a little poorly there with technical difficulties right away. I hope everyone can hear me now, and I hope everyone can see the presentation. We're going to step forward from the welcome page to the user interface, and we're going to walk through the interface. And I know some people have been asking that they're interested in seeing more content. They want to see something that's beyond just an introduction. Once we get past the welcome page, which we just finished, and once we get into the user interface and past that, we do start getting some actual examples of how to use the application and features it offers. I think you'll find those a bit more interesting. So in the user interface tour we're going to do here, we're going to go over the basics of the ribbon, some popular commands in the ribbon, information that's available in the status bar, and also look over our quick access toolbar. And while we were speaking of technical difficulties, I have to mention here that apparently Google is still processing the video for this portion of the presentation. It will play, but it is a lower visual quality. Again, I apologize.
Okay, thanks, Brad, for that overview of the welcome page. And now that we've got our basics set up, we'll do an overview tour of the UI, go through these ribbon categories and a couple other UI components in UltraEdit here. I'm going to touch on everything in the interest of time, but just get a general sense, maybe hit a few highlights. So first, we have the file menu here. Pretty basic, pretty standard, pretty common file menu. One thing that's very helpful in the file menu is to recently opened and closed here. You actually have a select and open option, so you can open multiple items from the recently opened and closed, which can be very useful if you need to recall several files that you were working on previously. And then the home tab. The home tab is basically the most commonly accessed functionality in UltraEdit. So you've got your basics like paste, cut, copy. The clipboard selector, we support multiple different clipboards within the application so that you can switch between them without overwriting data on another clipboard. All of your search options, navigation options, bookmarks, and then we have some, we call it extras, but these are supplemental functionalities for UltraEdit, FTP access, cloud services, which allows you to sync your settings between systems, launching our sister applications, UltraCompare. And then I really like these active file functions over here. The copy path name command here is very useful file properties if you need to see statistics about your file and its attributes, properties. It's got a lot of great information. These two, delete and rename, I really use them quite a bit. It's so helpful just to be able to delete the active file, and that's permanent disk deletion as opposed to recycle bin, and then renaming the active file, commonly used. You'll find those in the tab. So here in the Edit tab, we have quite a few options related to selecting and then deleting. You can actually save a selection as a new file. We also have typical spell check things if you want to move lines up, down. You know, these kinds of commands here, you're going to find more success using these with keyboard shortcuts, which we'll get to later. And then we have our column mode options in the Edit tab. A lot of great stuff here. We'll also get to that later in the webinar, and some additional insert functionality. Sort, that's a big one. Sorting the active file or the selected text. You can also open the sort options to configure how the sort's done. And then hex mode. If you ever need to toggle hex mode, you'll find that toggle here. You can also use Control-H for that. Format tab, a lot of great things for reformatting your text, re-indenting highlighted text if it's code highlighted. Then we have case conversion and some spaces tabs conversion, trim, trailing, leading spaces, and then paragraph reformatting here as well. In the View tab, this is related to items that change visual components of the editor itself. So things that, you know, add or remove visual elements to the editor, like column markers, the line change indicator when you make changes, and it shows, you know, over here in the gutter, the change lines. Spaces tabs, the ruler, line numbers, active line highlighting, all of that stuff you can find in the View tab and toggle it there. We also have the hide and show lines for code folding, and then some additional stuff over here for file change polling. If you have a log file that's being written to constantly and you want it to be updated as it's being written to by some external process, you can toggle that here. We have an always on top option that'll keep the editor above any other windows, and then a full screen mode when you want to maximize your editing space. Here in the coding tab, you actually have your language selector. Now by default, UltraEdit will automatically highlight your source files, but you can manually change the highlighting type here. You can also use this option to add another language. We've got comment insertion, comment removal, brace matching. We've got HTML and Markdown preview items here in the coding tab. We'll go over that later. You can insert HTML and Markdown tags from this section here, and then we have some reformatting options for HTML, XML, JSON, CSS over here. A-style reformatting for more classic languages like C++ and Java. And then some code template tools and some additional tools for generating widths, converting numbers, that sort of thing. And you can also use these items here if you want to select something in the editor and then do a quick search on that selection on Google or MSDN, C++, whatever. The project tab, this is where you can create a project, which is just a logical collection of your source files. You can create, reload, close projects here, adjust the settings. We have some light in project intelligent or project aware symbol functionality here as well. Layout tab will allow you to toggle your child windows. So all of these lists here, these explorers here, these are all child windows that you can toggle on or off as you need or as you see fit. So for example, here I've got my file explorer. You know, if you prefer a unified view instead of split, you can use this toggle here. But then you can just kind of browse through here if you want, and then, you know, we've got all kinds of great functionality here in the context menu to act upon these things. The file explorer. A lot of different windows, child windows here, templates, your tag lists, macros if you've got macros or scripts loaded. Another one that I'll briefly show is the function list here. The function list basically collects the list of functions in the active file and shows them in an organized list. And so you can double click to navigate through functions in your active source file. Oh, and by the way, I want to point out, if you ever have one of these windows and it ever like moves off the visible area of your screen and you can't recover it, you know, if you had it on an external monitor that's no longer available, you can use this gather windows button here, and that will bring all of the floating windows back inside of the visible area of the application. In our window tab, we've got some options for working with the actual editor window. So if you want to duplicate the view of the active file and have 2 file tabs for a single file, you can do that 1 or 2 or 3 or however many times. You can split your window horizontally and vertically. Now I've got 4 different views into the same file. We've got some file tab navigation stuff here. If you prefer tiled and cascaded editor windows, you can enable that here as well. And then if you ever want to launch a new instance of UltraEdit, you can use this option regardless of the multiple instances setting in settings. Finally, here in the advanced tab, we have some advanced functionality. SSH telnets, the ability to run a DOS command and pipe the output back to the editor or to the output window, the ability to set up user tools, which are similar to tools in Visual Studio, if you're familiar with those. You basically call a third-party application or a binary on the command line, and you can send parameters, dynamic parameters from the active file, the selection, the active file itself, that sort of thing. And then encryption abilities. So if you want to encrypt the active file, you can do that here. And then you can do some code page adjustments if you need. That's really advanced. Some conversions of the encoding. You can main configuration panel where we have a ton of different options for editor functionality. So a couple other things real quick. We also have our status bar, which has a lot of helpful information. For example, you can see active line, column, active clipboard. That's what this C0 represents, 0 representing the Windows clipboard. The Unix here is telling us that this file has Unix style line terminators instead of Windows line terminators. So they have an LF only as opposed to CRLF. You have your encoding indicator here, and you can also adjust the encoding. You can't really see because the menu is opening beneath my recording, but you can adjust the encoding, there we go, that the editor uses to display the active file. This will actually change the bytes of the file. It will just change the code page or the encoding used to view it. Here again, we have the list of, or the active highlighting type, as well as the list of installed languages that you can use. And then we have the active files, last modified date, the active file size, and the number of bytes and lines in the file. This will actually update when you make a selection. It'll show you how many bytes and lines are selected, or actually it's characters. I need to clarify because some characters can be multiple bytes. Then you have a read-write toggle here down at the bottom, and an insert to toggle insert over strike mode, and then column mode indicator as well. Will tell you if column mode is on. So one other thing we have over here, our document map, and this is common to most editors these days. If this isn't something that you want to see, it's pretty easy to change. You can just right-click on it and select Close Document Map, and it's gone. And then with file tabs, you may want to adjust how these display. By default, you're only going to get a single row of file tabs with this drop-down selector here. But if you want multiple lines of file tabs, then you can right-click and come to this File Tabs flyout down at the bottom, which you cannot see, but I will see if I can. Nope, that's not going to work. Move this up, collapse the ribbon. There we go. So you can see here that I can change my file tabs to multi-line. And now if I open enough files, you would be able to see that I've got multiple rows of file tabs. And then up here at the top of UltraEdit, we have the quick access toolbar. And this is going to give you an area where you can add your favorite or most used commands in the editor. To do that, you just right-click on any command and then say, add to quick access toolbar, and it's there. So I think that about does it in terms of a very high level, very brief overview of the UI in UltraEdit. Obviously a lot we didn't get to, but you can explore, poke around, see what you can find and discover in UltraEdit. There's always something to discover. And yeah, we'll move on to the next section. Okay, thanks Brad for that overview of the welcome page. Now that
All right, thank you, Ben, for that video. That was very informative. Our next thing we'll be looking at is the command palette. The command palette is really the intended to be the center point of UltraEdit. It's where you can go to have access to all of UltraEdit's functionality right at your fingertips, settings, commands, files. It's really what I like to think of as the workflow hub, and we're going to have a short segment on that.
So one of the best ways to discover and learn about the extensive functionality and settings available in UltraEdit is with the command palette. And you can open the command palette by pressing Control-Shift-P, and you will see a box open with every single command, menu item, and setting available in UltraEdit. Now, obviously, that's a lot. So that's why we've included this convenient search here, so you can search for what it is that you're looking for and see if UltraEdit has it. So let's say, for example, you start up UltraEdit and you're like, yeah, I'm not really digging the color theme. So you might want to search for color. And we can see here that the command palette returns a list of all the themes that are installed and available in UltraEdit. And this second column here actually shows us where these theme settings can be accessed. So we can see that they're in the layout tab. So as soon as we select a different theme and press enter, there's the one I want, we're going to see that theme change throughout the editor. So just as another example, let's say that you've heard a lot about UltraEdit's column mode, and you want to see what kind of options are available for column mode. So you might search for column in the command palette, and we can see here that we get all of the column mode actions that are available to us, as well as settings that contain the word column. Now, these may not be relevant to column mode itself, but they've got the keyword, so they show up in the results. One other thing I want to point out is that you'll also see over here in the far right column of the command palette in the results, any associated keyboard shortcut with a command. So none of these other commands have keyboard shortcuts, but column mode itself has an Alt-C keyboard shortcut. So I know that in the future, if I want to toggle column mode, I just have to hit Alt-C. I don't need to come back to the command palette. So if we hit enter to toggle column mode and then click around, we'll see, all right, now we are in column mode, and I can hit Alt-C to get out of it. So let's say that you've got this empty HTML file here, and you have a template that is like an HTML5 boilerplate template, and you want to insert that template quickly. You don't want to have to futz around in the menus looking for where that is, or open the template list window. The command palette can help here. So I will open it up again, Control-Shift-P, and I know the name of the template I'm looking for is HTML5, and there it is. So we can actually insert templates directly from the command palette. We can also run macros or run scripts. Very, very helpful, very handy to have that. Press enter, and my template is inserted. Now you'll notice that after you run some commands from the command palette, they are added to the recently used history list here. Now let's say that you know that you're going to be using this HTML5 template quite a bit. You don't care so much about the other two, but you really want this one to stay up near the top. So you can click the star icon here, and now when you open the command palette, that command is added to your favorites list. That way you can clear out your recently used history and still keep that one near the top. So something else you can do with the command palette that's quite helpful is use it for navigation in your files. So let's say you have a larger file like this one here, and you've got some error that's causing an issue, and your error output is saying it's at line 4198, column 81. So you can open up the command palette and type a colon, and as you can see here, we've got a few hints about how we can navigate by line, page break, or bookmark. So we want to go to line 4198, column 81, enter, and immediately we're taken to that location in the file. A couple of other things worth mentioning in the command palette is that I can actually use the command palette to open files. So for example, I begin typing a file, and I can see that the command palette is actually exploring my file system, and as I type, offers to autocomplete based on what I'm typing. I can hit tab to complete just like I do in like a terminal. And let's say that I've got this site and I want to open all HTML files. So I can actually go down through here and open files one at a time by hitting enter. The command palette will stay open when I do that. But let's say that I want to open all the HTML files all at once, then I can just use my wildcard and say star.html, hit enter, and all of my HTML files in that directory are opened. Now that's pretty awesome, but what's even better is that let's say that I want to reopen a file that I had open previously. Get these other ones closed. Oh. Then I can go back into the command palette and I can type a / and I can see all of my recently opened files, and I can type part or all of these file paths to begin filtering them down. So let's say I want to get to rent.html. I just type REN and then I'm filtered down to that item in my recently opened, hit enter, and that file is open. Now that's an awesome feature for when you want to quickly open a file, you can't quite remember where it is, or if you're working with FTP files, it also keeps those file paths in the history so you don't have to navigate through the FTP menus and explorers to re-access that file. So that's the command palette in a nutshell, a very powerful tool that can really help you get acquainted with the editor and can take your work from good to great.
All right, thank you, Ben, for that. I think that fully explains our command palette. I hope that is informative for everyone and that you can use that on your daily UltraEdit usage. All right, now what we're going to start doing is I think people were looking for some actual feature examples of real world experiences. So we're going to start walking through features of UltraEdit, and I think this will really kind of point you in the direction of the tools and functionalities that UltraEdit can provide and how they can be useful to you in your daily work. First, we're going to look at keyboard shortcuts and navigation. If you really want to improve productivity, keeping your fingers on the keyboard, staying focused on the keyboard can really improve that. And Ben is going to walk through everything UltraEdit has to offer for our keyboard shortcuts and navigation support.
Now we're going to take a few minutes and look at some of the most useful keyboard shortcuts in UltraEdit. Now I know some of you may be watching thinking, why do I need to learn more keyboard shortcuts? And the reason is because, especially in an editor, knowing the keyboard shortcuts and minimizing the number of interactions with a mouse saves you a lot of time. In fact, I was looking into some research on this, and they found that people who use the mouse instead of just common keyboard shortcuts wasted approximately 134 hours per year. That's almost a full month of work. So keyboard shortcuts, they're not just about convenience. They actually make you more productive. So we'll take a look at some of the most useful ones. Not going to get into the basics. Everyone already knows Control A to select all, Control Z and Y to undo redo. And of course, you can use Control N to create a new file in UltraEdit. Want to close a file in UltraEdit, use Control F4. Now, we all know Control S to save. If you want to do a save as, you can hit F12 to open up the save as dialog. Very helpful. And by the way, if you ever want to close all open files, you can use Control Shift F4 to close them all. And get those open again real quick. All right, a couple of helpful things for navigating file tabs. You can use Control Tab to toggle between the last access tab order, just like you would in a browser. You can also use Alt down arrow to cycle through your file tabs left to right, and then Alt up arrow to cycle through them right to left. Let's take a look at some editing shortcuts. Of course, most of you probably know Control Backspace to backspace a word at a time, and then Control Delete to delete a word at a time. But if you need to delete the entire line that you're on, you can do that without selecting it. Just hit Control E and the entire line is going to be deleted. Let's say that you need to delete multiple lines, like let's say you want to delete this entire div here. So all you need to do is select all the way down through all the lines. You don't have to select the entire line. Hit Control E, and then all of the lines that are included in the selection are deleted. A couple of other deletion hotkeys that might be helpful. Control F11 will delete everything to the beginning of the line. Control F12 will delete everything to the end of the line. So these lines right here, it looks like they have line breaks that we want to get rid of and join these three lines together. So we can join lines very easily by hitting Control J. And as you can see, UltraEdit takes care of deleting tabs there so that we only have a single space in the new line. If we want to join more than one line though to the next, we just select the lines that we want to join and hit Control J. We can see that we've got a single line here. And this actually gives me an opportunity to shout out the word wrap toggle, which is Control W. Very helpful to toggle word wrap so that you can see wrap lines. And then one last editing shortcut here. If you need to duplicate a line, rather than using the Control C, the select, Control C, Control V to paste, you can use Alt Shift D to duplicate the line. You can do that as many times as you need. Okay, so let's take a look at some search and selection shortcuts. So the most common search keyboard shortcut that you're probably going to use is F3. Select a word, hit F3, and that will find the next occurrence of that word. You can use Control F3 to cycle backwards. And then if you don't have a selection and hit F3, it's going to search for the last word that was searched for. You might want to use Control G from time to time for go-to. Open up the go-to dialog, enter in a line number and a column number, hit enter to quickly navigate. And I'm going to flip over to this CSS file and demonstrate Control B, which is search and select to matching brace. So basically that will search forward in the file from the active caret position, find the first brace, and then select to its matching counterpart. Very helpful if you're needing to navigate through scope in your source files. Then bookmarks. Bookmarks can be very helpful when you're searching through your files. If you need to mark where you last were or mark a couple places of interest, you can use Control F2 to toggle a bookmark on the line. And then you can use F2 by itself to navigate through bookmarks, Alt F2 to jump backwards the other way. Okay, a couple of other multi-select features that I want to show you with keyboard shortcuts here. So one of the most useful search keyboard shortcuts is Control Period. Control Period is going to highlight all occurrences of the word under the carets throughout the file. So I can hit Escape to dismiss the highlighting, but if I want to select more than just the word under the caret, I can do that. So if I want to go all the way up to the colon here and then select all occurrences of this string, I hit the same shortcut, Control Period, and all occurrences of this string, even if it's multiple words, are going to be highlighted in my file. Now, let's say that I want to, for example, I want to select this meta here, and I want to select the next occurrence of it. I can do that by using the keyboard shortcut Control semicolon. And see, that's going to activate the highlight all feature for the word that I'm selecting, so I can see where my next occurrences are going to be. And I can continue to press Control semicolon to add to my selection and say, oops, I went one too far there. So rather than dismissing this selection here, I can hit Alt Shift Z and remove the last selection I added to my collection. And then I can even do that again if I want, and then add more. And let's say that I want to go ahead and select all occurrences of this word property all at once. I can use Control, comma for that. Now, every occurrence of the word property in the file, you can see down here, we've got 41 selections. Most of them are off screen, but every one of them is now selected. This is very helpful when you're wanting to update all occurrences of a string in your file very quickly. Okay, a couple of interesting case conversion shortcuts that you might find helpful. These might appear novel at first, but I'm always surprised at how often I use these shortcuts. So let's say we select this phrase here. We can hit F5 to capitalize every word in this selection. We can use Shift F5 to invert that case, Alt F5 to convert to uppercase, and Control F5 to convert to lowercase. Let's finish this up by going over a few helpful navigation and positioning shortcuts. Now, we all know that we can use Control Home to jump to the top of the file, Control N to jump to the bottom of the file, but UltraEdit offers some additional navigation shortcuts, such as Control Up arrow. That's going to move, Control Up arrow is going to move the view of the file up without changing your active line. And then Control Down arrow will move it back down. So if you need to refer to something that's just off screen, you can do so without losing your place. You can also use Alt Page Up and Alt Page Down to move the caret between the top and the bottom line in the visible portion of the file. Alt minus sign on the numeric keypad is going to make the active line the top line in the window. So it will not change your active line, it'll just reposition it to the top. Alt asterisk will move the active line to the center, to the middle of the window. And then Alt plus on the numeric keypad will move the active line to the bottom. And then of course, code folding, a very helpful feature. If you're in a file that has foldable nodes, you can use Control plus on the numeric keypad to collapse all of the foldable sections in your file. You can use Control asterisk to expand all. So Control plus collapses, Control asterisk expands all. And then you can use Control minus to collapse just the active node. So this is just going to collapse the node that I was inside of there. Control minus will expand that. One other note about Control minus, you can use this actually in any file, even in a plain text file that's not source. Just highlight an arbitrary number of lines and hit Control minus, and UltraEdit will collapse just the selection. If I want to expand that again, I can hit Control minus again on the numeric keypad. So one other thing that I wanted to demonstrate, I've got Control Alt S as a custom keyboard shortcut for split window. Now I want to jump between these two splits without reaching for my mouse. So I can use F6 to do that. Jump between the two split windows, getting work done without ever having to reach for my mouse. And this is the point, is that you can add, remove, or customize keyboard shortcuts to your liking. Now we're not going to cover that in this introductory webinar, but you can do this in advanced settings and then in the key mapping section where you can see all the commands and apply new key mappings should you desire. Obviously, we've covered a lot, gone through a lot of key mappings. I'm sure most people won't remember them, but we will be providing resources for the key mappings in our wiki, as well as a key mapping video. You can even go back to that key mapping section in settings and open a file containing all keyboard shortcuts and the commands that they're mapped to. So if you like to print stuff off and have a physical copy, you have that option available to you. But the point is to get into the key mappings, learn a couple of them, see if they don't really make a difference in how you use the editor and really help you get into the flow of your coding, of your text editing, whatever it is you're doing. They can make a very big difference in your productivity. So there you have it. That's keyboard shortcuts in UltraEdit in a very long nutshell.
All right, thank you, Ben, again for a really great segment. I think you covered key mapping enough for everyone. So the next item we're going to look at find and replace. Anyone who's used UltraEdit for very long will agree that find and replace is one of the more powerful features UltraEdit has to offer. So Ben's going to launch into another video here discussing that.
So one of the staples of any editor worth its weight in salt is its find and replace. Now UltraEdit has a very powerful find and replace engine, but it may not appear that way when you first hit Control F, because that opens our smaller, less conspicuous quick find dialog. Now this functions very similarly to the search in a browser where you immediately type your search string and you immediately jump to the matches throughout the file. You press enter to cycle through those matches or Control enter to cycle backwards through those matches. There's a drop-down history for previous search strings. We also have this filter button here, which will show us only the rows or the lines in this file that contain our search string. It can be useful from time to time. Now, if we want to clear this, we'll use the clear filter button up here in the home tab. Now, in order to get to the larger find and replace dialog with more options for granularity, that sort of thing, we can press Control F a second time, or we can press this button over here to open up to the larger find and replace dialog. Now, I know some people want to come to this dialog straight away. They don't want to deal with the quick find dialog, and if so, you can jump to this dialog with Alt F3. But if you have your muscle memory mapped to Control F for find and you want to come here, then you can just reset the key mapping from Control F to the regular find dialog instead of quick find. That way you'll come here straight away, bypassing quick find completely. So here we have the larger find and replace dialog. As you can see, we have all of our search options here: find, replace, find in files, replace in files. And we're not going to go into great depth regarding the various options and settings in all of these different searches, because frankly, find and replace could be a separate webinar in and of itself. There's just so much there to learn. But we'll touch on some of the highlights and give a quick overview. First thing that you'll notice is that we have a multi-line input here. So if you want to search for a paragraph of text or multiple lines of code, you can just paste that straight away into the find dialog. And then in replace, you can, paste in multiple lines into the replace with field as well. It's very nice that you don't have to fool around with regular expressions and having to code line endings and that sort of thing. So we also have our search target here. We can search in the current file, in all of our open files, or in selected text. Obviously, we want to have text selected for this option to work. And then we can get into some advanced options if we click the gear here to show the rest of the find and replace dialog. So you see here we've got some more granularity in terms of whole word case. We can search in column. We can do filtering. Regular expressions option, we have 3 different types of regular expressions that we support. My favorite is Perl. I think it's the most powerful. Again, we're not going to get into all of that, but those options are what's available to you. In the replace dialog, the options are a little bit different, but they're more germane to doing a replace operation, so preserve case, that sort of thing. And then find in files and replace in files. These dialogs tend to get a little tall, so I'll move this up. But you can see that for find in files, we can actually search an entire directory. We can search our project with some filtering options in terms of file types, file extensions, subdirectories, that sort of thing. And most of the find options are also available in find in files. With replace in files, it's very similar, but with replace in files, there is one very big caveat. The replace happens directly in the files on the disk. So there is no opening of the file. There is no temporary modification of the file before it's committed to disk. So it is permanent. So you want to be very careful, very judicious about your use of replacing files. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Find tab here. And one of the really powerful options in the Find dialog is this list lines containing string. So with this option selected, when you run your find, you're going to get this find string list. It's basically a log of every line in your file that contains your search string. And if you right click in here, there are some very helpful options. You can copy these results to the clipboard. You can create a new file from them, bookmark them, or delete them. All of those very useful things that might come in handy from time to time. One other aspect of search I wanted to demonstrate was this option here in Find in Files, interactive results. Now with this option selected, I'm doing a Find in Files search, but my results are actually opened in a single view. So I can see results from multiple files, excerpts from multiple files within a single view. So for example, let's say that I want to search my website directory for all links. Let's just search for an opening a tag, and we'll set the file types to HTML. We'll want to search subdirectories. And when I click find, my results are opened, and these are the actual files. These are actual portions of these files that are opened in a single view. Right now, I only have 2 files that return any results. But if you're searching a larger project, like let's say you want to search for a variable name in your project, you can actually open the portions of your files within your project that reference that variable name. And then you can edit these directly in the files themselves. So, you can edit, do whatever, and then save your changes to the files. Just hit Control S and it will save the change out to the file. Interactive results, interactive find in files, very unique take on find in files. So that's about it. We'll wrap this section of the webinar up and conclude find and replace in UltraEdit.
All right, thank you, Ben, for giving us full, good coverage of find and replace. And I agree with Ben, we probably could do an entire webinar just on find and replace in the future. Now we're going to move on to column mode, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of column mode. Column mode is a very popular feature among UltraEdit users. Column mode allows you to edit multiple rows of data in the same column at once. You can select column mode from the Edit tab in the ribbon, or you can also type Alt-C, which also enables column mode. And then you can simply make a selection and begin typing. You can also select the column of text and then type over it or delete it. UltraEdit also offers many features to assist with column mode editing. For example, you can click and insert number, selecting your first number increment, and insert, and it will enter a column of numbers. You can also enter a column of text. Another useful feature is if you have numerical data, like we've just entered this numeric column, I can now select it as much as I wish and hit Sum Selection, and it'll even sum of the selected text. I can also delete columns. I've decided I did not want this column. I can simply select it and hit Delete Column. In addition to directly editing column data, UltraEdit also allows us to reformat data. I can make a selection, and then I can center it, right justify it, and return it back to left justification. As you can see, UltraEdit has simple yet powerful column mode editing features. Right, now that we've covered column mode, we're going to move on to multi-caret and multi-select. These are two powerful features. I'm a fan of these myself, and Ben's going to do a good job of explaining these.
We'll take a look at multi-caret editing and multiple selections in UltraEdit. On the most basic level, you can create multiple insertion points by holding Control and clicking throughout the file. So I am holding the Control key, and then I've created 3 carets in the active file. And you can always look down here at the status bar to see how many carets you have or insertion points you have in the file. Then you can begin typing and moving around as you normally would in multiple places at once. Now, you can also use this same technique for selections. So I make a selection here, hold Control, and I can select other portions of the file, adding them to my multiple carets here. And then I can begin modifying these selections all at once if I'd like. If you ever find that you have a selection in your set that you need to get rid of, it's easy to do that. Just hold Control and click on the selection you want to dismiss. And if you want to dismiss all of the carets except for the last one, then you can do that without reaching for the mouse. You can use Control Shift /, and that's going to leave only the last selection that you created. So then you can go back to single caret editing. Now, we already covered this in the keyboard shortcuts section, but just to revisit, you can select a string and then use the keyboard shortcut Control semicolon to select the next occurrence of that string. And remember that if you select one more than you needed, you can always use Alt-Shift-Z to remove the selections that you created. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Control comma to select all occurrences of the word under the caret or the selection if one exists. One other helpful little trick here is selecting multiple lines. So you may sometimes need to select multiple non-contiguous lines in the file, and you can do that just by holding Control and clicking on the line number here in the margin. So now, for example, if I copy all of these selections and create a new file, I can paste them in each selection on its own line. So another helpful aspect of multi-caret editing is being able to create multiple carets from a single selection. And so as an example, I've got this JavaScript file here. And let's say that I want to update these properties here to declare not empty string values, but actual value of false. Now, I can't do this with something like column mode because, as you can see, the variable widths of these property names causes the quotes to open up on different columns in each line. So normally with column mode, you might use like Alt, click, and drag to create a columnar selection and begin typing or whatever, but obviously that's not possible here. So what I can do with multi-caret is select the lines where I need to make the changes. And then I'm going to hold Control and click beyond the end of line to create carets at the end of every one of those lines that was selected. And from here, I can use navigation and then begin typing in multi-caret mode. Very nifty little aspect of multi-caret editing in UltraEdit. And then one final element of multi-caret editing that I'd like to demonstrate here is the multi-caret lined and matching with paste. Now, before you get confused, let me just show you how this works, and I think it'll make sense. So we have here this navigation list in this HTML, and we need to update all of these text labels with new text labels, which I have here in this file. So we're going to select all of the new text labels here. So that's a single selection, Control A, Control C, and then we're going to come back to our HTML, and then we'll select each individual label, creating 5 different selections in the file. Now, because we have an equal number of line endings in our source data on the clipboard to the number of selections in the file, when I paste, it's going to automatically insert each line from the clipboard into each selection respectively into the file. So that's very helpful if you need to like update a list or add some text data to an array. But it's important to note that the number of line endings in that clipboard data has to match the number of selections or the number of carets. So if I only selected, let's say, 4 of these, and I came over here and made 5 selections, what's going to happen is that all 4 of those lines are going to be inserted in my 5 selections. So that is multi-caret and multi-select editing in UltraEdit. Very useful, very handy little feature.
Thank you, Ben, for going over multi-caret and multi-select. Now we're going to jump to our live preview feature for Markdown and HTML, and Ben is going to do this segment as well.
All right, let's take a look at UltraEdit's live preview, which provides a side-by-side browser view of your rendered HTML or Markdown source. Handy little feature if you find yourself working with either one of those markup languages on a consistent basis. So here I have an HTML file, and I can activate my live preview by coming to coding and selecting live preview. And you can see here that UltraEdit creates a split view with my rendered HTML over on the right. And what's really great is that as I'm updating my HTML source, I see my changes reflected over in the live preview. And if I'm browsing down through my rendered preview here and I find a spot where, hey, I need to update that, I can double click on the section of content I want to update, and I'll be jumped to that location over in source. So I can make my changes and have that reflected over in the live preview. So for Markdown, live preview is pretty much the same. It's activated in the same place. We can see our preview over here on the right of the rendered Markdown. But we've also added a few extra styles. So if you want to see your Markdown in a different color theme, you can select, for instance, dark here, and you can see a darker Markdown rendering. I believe the default is light. This is what you might see, what we typically see on like GitHub or most places that host Markdown files. So that is live preview. Again, very handy, very simple and straightforward, but very useful. And if you find yourself using this quite a bit, then one thing you might want to do is add it to your quick access bar up here. And to do that, you can right click on the icon, and actually you can do this for any item in the ribbon, and select add to quick access toolbar. Now I can toggle my live preview without having to go into the ribbon.
All right, thank you, Ben, for going over live preview and Markdown and HTML for us. Next thing we're do is look at what to do when you open a file and it does not have syntax highlighting support out of the box.
Now let's look at syntax highlighting support in UltraEdit. While the majority of file types you would normally work with are supported out of the box by UltraEdit, you may find yourself working with a file that doesn't have syntax highlighting when you open it. Let's take a look at what is still a relatively common type, the venerable INI file type on Windows. And you can see I've opened one here. This is the UltraCompare configuration file. And I'd like it if it was syntax highlighted. It makes editing a little easier. Let's see what UltraEdit can do with that. You go to Settings, Editor Display, Syntax Highlighting. We can go to Add Remove Languages. And here in the filter, we can type INI. And you can see the INI files is one of the options. I select that, close the selection dialog, and you'll see the syntax highlighting has been enabled. As soon as that was enabled in the settings dialog, it was enabled in the document, and our INI file is now syntax highlighted properly. Now that we have syntax highlighting enabled for INI files, you can see that listed here under installed Word files, right there, INI files. And if we're going to be working with INI files for some time, maybe new INI files editing back and forth, we might want to set INI files as our default for new files.
That way we can create a new file, put content in to that new file, and we can see that it's highlighted automatically as an INI file, even though there's no typeset and it doesn't have a file extension. That can be really convenient when you're working with a large number of files over some time. So now you've seen that you can easily add a new language type to UltraEdit, and it only takes a few clicks to do so. All right, we have basically wrapped up the items we were looking at for features for UltraEdit, but now we're going to jump to what's more of a real-world example when you're working with file data. In this case, it's going to be HTML data and JavaScript data. And Ben is going to walk through a real-world example of converting data from one file to the other.
So I'm doing some light web development here, and I have a need to take this HTML select item, all of the values inside of it, which are all of the states in the USA, and transpose them into a JavaScript multi-dimensional array. I wanted to show you how easy this is with UltraEdit. What looks like a very labor-intensive or manual process, it can actually be done in a couple of quick steps. Now, there are a couple ways I could do this. I could create a macro to run over this in the JavaScript file and format it the way I need, but I think the manual steps is actually going to be a little bit quicker. So what I'll do is I'll copy this data, and then in my JavaScript file, I am going to create the array and paste in the data. Now, the first thing I need to do is get rid of this orphan closing option HTML tag that's on every other line. So I'm going to select all of the data I pasted in here and hit Control-R for replace. And for find what, it's going to be that closing option tag. Replace with, I'm going to leave empty, select selected text for the replace target, and hit replace all. Now you can see they're all gone, but I still have this empty line with some spaces. So in order to get rid of that, I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P to bring up the command palette. And I'm going to search for this delete all empty white space only lines. And because I have a selection, it's only going to apply this to my selection. So now all my lines are gone. Now I can see I've got my data lined up in nice columns here. So I'm going to go into column mode, Alt-C, and I'm going to hit Control-Shift-End. And to create a columnar selection, I'll hit up arrow so I don't get that closing bracket for my array. And then I'll hit backspace and begin typing on each line the array that's inside, the subarray that's inside of the larger array. So square bracket, single quote, and then I'll hit right arrow to come over to this double quote and this brace, this HTML brace, select those, backspace, hit my single quote again, and then do a comma and space and another single quote for the second item in each subarray. Now I need to close each of these with a closing square bracket and a comma. So in order to do that, I'm going to go out of column mode, and I've got my selection here. And actually, I need to extend that down to there. And now I'm going to hit a Control-R and do another replace in selected text. Now I'm going to use regular expressions for this. I'm going to set that option. And with regular expressions, we can use the $ to represent the end of a line. So I'm going to search for the end of the line. This isn't the actual line terminators themselves, it's just a positional thing. So I'm matching this position. And on each line, I'm going to replace it with a single quote to terminate the string, and then a closing bracket to close the subarray, and then a comma. And I'll select the text and hit replace all. I've got my multi-dimensional array. I accidentally selected too much down here, so I'll just backspace that, semicolon. But as you can see, that's a very quick way to transpose data from one format to another with UltraEdit.
All right, thank you, Ben, for that example. I think that can be extremely useful for anyone who's having to move data back and forth between HTML and JavaScript. That concludes our presentation. This would be a good opportunity for us to answer some questions. I'm going to start out with that. Ben, feel free to jump in if you wish.
Yeah, I just real quick, we had a question here about integration with Embarcadero products, specifically RAD Studio. We don't offer that right now, but our product teams do work closely together, and we are looking at some cross-pollination between our different products. So stay tuned on that one.
Thank you, Ben. Looks like we have a question asking about third-party plugins, and then are we going to ever add the support for plugins to UltraEdit? I don't think anyone answered that, so I'm going to go ahead and take a stab at that. I don't know about supporting any plugins from other applications, but as far as plugins written by other authors, we are actually working on a plugin addition to UltraEdit and UE Studio. It should be in the application early to mid 2023, so within like the next 6 months or so. It's not a promise on that. It is under active development, and we do know that people have asked for that for a long time, and it's a feature that we are excited to see come into UltraEdit. So I would say just keep a lookout, and we will definitely be letting our users know and posting that whenever we've got more information on that. But it is something we're actively working. So I hope that answers your question there. Someone had a comment on what the difference is between on our Mac and Windows, Mac and Linux roadmap versus the Mac and Windows. I can say that we are aware that the Mac and Linux version of UltraEdit does not have the full set of features that the Windows version does, and we are working on that. We're actually going to be making a change next year for how the Mac and Linux versions are released. The goal, and this is still in the planning stages, but the goal is to bring the Mac and Linux releases in line with the Windows releases. That doesn't mean that they'll have feature parity, but it means that we'll be working on them at the same time so that features, if at all possible, will start going into them within a close time frame. Instead of being separated by multiple releases, the Mac and Linux versions will hopefully be receiving new features roughly at the same time as the Windows products. That's something's under development. We'll see how that goes, but that is a goal we're going for next year, and I hope that will help people out on the Mac and Linux side. Hey, Ben, was there any question that jumped out at you that you'd like me to answer?
I'm still looking here. We're trying to handle most of these in the comments. A lot of them are about specific functionality or something we covered. Some people asking for some enhancement requests, which are awesome. Just know that if we don't answer your question directly, we do see it, and we are going to cover all of these internally if we don't on this webinar. We did get a question from Richard about vision impaired people and then what quality of life settings UltraEdit might offer for that. We do have some automatic detection of screen readers. So if you're using a screen reader when you first start UltraEdit, you should be prompted to switch to the menu system instead of ribbons, because menus are far more conducive to screen readers. And then I think, Brad, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but do we also switch to the classic color theme as well? If not, that's accessible in the menus, but using the classic theme for the editor should help for vision impaired people.
Was that a question on screen readers? I don't know if you saw, but I just got kicked out of the presentation. I'm just not getting back in. We have seen that in the past, the users who switched to the Windows Classic theme, that works better than because of the way Windows handles that internally. You know, I would say that if someone has specific issues they're seeing, they definitely should send us messages on that, and we will do our best to action those. We have tried to support visually impaired situations and software as much as we can, so we would certainly like to keep doing that.
Yeah, and question here regarding licensing. It seems like we always get this question. It's a valid question. We do currently and will continue to offer both a subscription option and a perpetual option. So that's not going to change. That's going to stay that way for the foreseeable future. We are not moving to subscription only. You're going to have both options available for licensing. I'm looking through these questions.
Yes, I'm doing the same.
I think for the most part, we've answered most of these. Well, last thing I'd like to say is if you have a specific question or you're experiencing an issue with UltraEdit that we didn't get to here, or you just want to know, is it possible to do this better? Please email our support team. It's support@ultraedit.com. We have an in-house team of product specialists. Our support team is very familiar with our product, and they'll be able to get you set regarding no matter whether it's an enhancement request or using the product or some sort of issue that you're seeing. We have pretty responsive support team as well. I mean, they usually get back within an hour or two. So please reach out to us. And if you have ideas or you'd like to see a certain webinar covering a certain topic that we haven't covered yet, there's plenty of opportunity for future webinars, I feel like, especially with UltraEdit. We did get a question about UltraCompare. We didn't touch on that due to time constraints in this webinar, but we would like to cover that in a future webinar, as well as using Git in UE Studio. Brad, there was one question, the differences between UltraEdit and UE Studio. Maybe you can touch on that and help clear that up.
Sure. Well, UE Studio is focused more on being an IDE and less of and not entirely just an editor. For that, it supports a very large number of various development environment suites, languages. It also has Git support for version control. So that's the primary difference. Is UE Studio is focused more on being a light IDE, and UltraEdit's focused on being just being an editor. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap, but that's the general difference. I did see some questions here about the Mac. Again, I answered one of those before, but one specific one was asking about what I'm going to read into is our save state feature we have on Windows. And I will say to anyone who using the Mac version of UltraEdit, the latest version of the Mac version of UltraEdit is starting beta right now. So if you would like to participate in that, contact us. Ben gave you the contact information, support@ultraedit.com. And that specific item the user was looking for, which was save state support, is in the UltraEdit for Mac beta that is going to be released. So I hope that answers your question there. And I agree with Ben. I think we've covered a lot of the questions here, and we are way over time.
Yeah, I would like to say again, thanks everyone for bearing with us. This was, as far as our team goes, our first foray into webinars. So had a few hiccups there, and we've gotten some great feedback from you guys on how to make this a little bit more easy to follow in the future. So thank you for all that great feedback. And we will be back and bigger and better with another webinar at some point in the future. So yeah, thanks for bearing with us and staying over time. And I think that we'll wrap this up now. Appreciate everyone's attention and engagement.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I agree with Ben completely.
All right, thanks again. Bye.